Chapter 13, Layouts and Viewports. Hi, Joe Cerrone. We're going to take a look at this chapter on layouts and viewports, and we're going to look at the difference between paper space and model space in viewports that are tiled versus just different shapes of viewports. We'll take a look at layout versus model space, and then we'll look at some guidelines for layouts and viewports, some other aspects as far as being able to set up these viewports. So let's get started. As we look at chapter 13, we're just going to do a brief overview of the concepts between paper space and model space. And so as we look at this chapter, when we draw things, what we do is we draw them in model space and we draw them full size. And then when we work in layouts, what that is it's a template for the paper that we plan to print on. And so we have different title blocks set up for you in the basic AutoCAD course. And we have a general design or a plate drawing template. We have a mechanical template, and we have an architectural template. So for example, if we download the architectural template and we open that, here's our paper space, and you can see this little right triangle. This is called layout mode. And then here's our model space. And in our model space is where we would do all of our drawing. And so if we were looking at something like our floor plan drawing, in our model space we have this at full size, 17 feet by 19 feet. And then when we place it on the title block, we go to layout mode, and then we create what's called a viewport. And so if I delete this viewport, and then if I were to recreate the process, the way that we standardize in this CAD course is that we use the viewport layer, and then we go to the view tab, and on the view tab we can create new viewports, and for some reason they get kind of blocked out. Let's see if this is the one. New view. No, that's the view command. So we'll use the menu bar and we'll go to the viewport, and we'll create a viewport. And so we can say one viewport, and we create a rectangular viewport, and then if you double click in that viewport, that's where you see what you drew in model space. And so you can edit it right there in the viewport. Some people in interior design will do that. We can talk a little bit about that, where we have special settings within the viewport tabs. But you'll also notice that when I deleted that circular shape in model space, it's also been removed. And then if I were to undo that till it comes back, you'll see it in model space as well. And so we use these viewports to set the scale within the viewport. And so here we can go through and set up a scale factor for that. And so by setting a scale factor, when we bring this drawing to the facilities department, we can then use a scale to measure it. And so we could go and get an architectural scale from Amazon, and then we would be able to go through and measure that precisely. So for example, if you were going to measure this drawing, you could go to Amazon and buy an architectural scale, and then the units of measurement for 1/4 of an inch equals a foot can be measured using an architectural scale. It's a little tricky, but it's not that difficult when you get down to everything isn't digital these days. That's why we create these drawings in these different viewports with these different scales. So when we print this out on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, we can then scale the drawing, and the measurements then will translate to the measurements that we have dimensioned there. All right, continuing. So paper space and model space. We draw things in model space, and then we can flip over to paper space. You can type the word tile mode, and that would be the command that is used to flip screen. So if we're in a drawing here and I type in tile mode and I change it to 1, tile mode 0, Remember, AutoCAD's a binary. It's made by computer programmers, and so 1 and 0 on and off, you find a lot of the settings, instead of saying on or off, it's either 1 or 0. So those are layouts. As we work with the layouts, when we have a new drawing that we just start from scratch, you'll get 2 layout tabs. If you're using the architectural tab from us, from AutoCAD, then you'll have a floor plan, an elevation, and a section tab. And then we use those appropriately to put elevation drawings and section drawings within that title block. So here's some functions of how layouts work and working with viewports. And so they go through some of the settings in the options to be able to lock the displays of the viewports and things like that. And then what they do is they show that you can actually freeze different layers in the viewports, which is kind of a neat thing. So for example, if I'm in a drawing of an architectural drawing and I wanted to freeze out this layer, and so this layer here is on the furniture 2 layer. Well, you can do that a couple of different ways. One, I can just turn off the layer in model space, and there you can see that it's gone, and that'll be gone in layout as well. And then I can turn that back on, and on and off and freeze and thaw are the same. It's just one recalculates out the databases. And then if we go into the layout mode, on architectural drawings, like for interior design, they'll use this technique where in the viewport they'll freeze out that layer. And so here's viewport layer freeze, and then you'll see that that information is gone. And I could do the same thing for like the dimensions. I can take the dimensions off. And so oftentimes on drawings that are just showing the furniture or something like that, they'll freeze it within the viewport, but that leaves the model intact. And so that's some of the techniques that we can look at as we go through and we learn about viewports in this chapter. And so we have these different layouts that we work with, and then we can create different viewports. You can see here's one large rectangular viewport, and then there's another smaller viewport. And then here with this mechanical drawing, they go through some of the automation that you can go through, kind of like in SolidWorks, where you can create a drawing at scale with viewports using a layout wizard. And so here's some of the guidelines for using viewports and layouts. And then creating and setting up layouts as we work with them. You can use the layout wizard, which will go through and create the viewports for you on the drawing in the title block, but essentially we can create those the old-fashioned way, which is basically in the drawing. Here we have, like for example, our mechanical drawing, and we have 2 viewports here. We have a viewport of the top view, and then we have an isometric viewport. And so if I were to recreate this, I could double click out here, click on the one viewport and delete it, and then you'll see that that goes away, and then click on the other viewport and delete that one as well. When you're in Paperspace, it treats viewports just like you would an object, okay, just like a rectangle or something like that. And then when I delete them, they're gone. And what we do is we create the viewports on the viewport layer. And then if I wanted to create a rectangular viewport, I could say view, viewport, one viewport. If I said 4 viewports, it'll make 4. And you can try that out. You can say, give me 4 viewports. And it'll go through and create the 4 viewports. And then you can go through and toggle what you want to see in those different viewports. This one's just set up at 2D. And double click out of that and delete that. And then if we wanted to go and put a viewport in, we could say view, viewport, one viewport, and then we can just go and go from corner to corner here, double click in that viewport, and then here's our drawing. And so what we do is we put our drawing in here, and I typically will set that up at full or half scale, try it at full scale, see if it fits. It does. We'll turn off our grid. And then what we'll do is we'll lock that. So we put the drawing in, and then we lock the viewport so that the scale doesn't change. And then if we wanted to, we can create another viewport. And so for this example, I'll just draw a circle, and then I'll convert that to a viewport by saying view viewport object. And what it'll allow me to do is turn a closed boundary shape into a viewport. And then I can go through and I can set up the view scale for the other drawing. And so I can go here and say, make that an isometric view, and then see if I can get that shown. Let's see. Sometimes it can be a little tricky. And then we can go within that viewport and be able to change some of the different styles and things. And so as we go through and we work on these viewports, there's a number of different factors that play into components. And so as we work with our viewports in these different layouts, that's the basics on how to work with viewports and layouts. And then as we go through, there's some other options for creating those viewports automatically. And then there's some other aspects to CAD which are a little bit more advanced when we go into page setup. And so we can go through on the layout, and this is essentially when we're getting ready to set that layout out for printing, because essentially we create these digital books of the blueprints. And what this is talking about here is to automate the plotting routine. And so what you can do is you can have the paper set up and associated with a specific plotter. Let's say you have a plotter at work that prints 11 by 17. Well, you set the layout manager or the page setup manager to the printer so that it will have the proper output settings for that printer. And then once you have that, you can automate the entire production of those blueprints. And so talks a little bit more here about viewports. And so when we work with viewports, we can either have viewports like I just demonstrated in Paperspace, where we have these different viewports that we can toggle in between. Or when you're in model space, you have the ability to have model space viewports. And the model space viewports allow you to kind of toggle between them. But essentially they use viewports in Paperspace to show different details. And so here's like an architectural blueprint, and what they can do is have like a large overall print of the facility, and then maybe zoom in on some feature like the plumbing in the bathroom or something like that, and it would be like a detailed view of the object. And so the viewports are used so you don't have to redraw everything. In the past you would copy and paste all the drawings, and somebody says, well, what if we just had one that we linked to? And that's how the parametric aspect starts to play into CAD. As you get more skilled with your CAD skills, what you'll find is that they have what's called parametric relations, which then link one view to another so that when you update something on a drawing, everything updates. And so here's some other examples of the file that we had in the last module, where you can just look at the viewports and how you can scale the geometry, and how you can set up the viewport scaling, as we talked about, to be able to measure it with different rulers. Be sure to lock the viewport after you've created it, otherwise you just have to keep resetting it and relocking it. And then they talk a little bit about line types and line weights. Oftentimes we'll have to invoke the PSLT scale and enable that to get line types to look right in Paperspace. Alrighty, so that's the chapter 13 information, and that ends this lecture.